Uertval woman kicked out her black Adiopal father, but he was hiding 5 million. It started with slammed doors and silence, the kind of silence that screams louder than any argument. Marissa, a 28-year-old woman with polished nails and an expensive smile, stood in the middle of the marble, tiled living room that her adoptive father, David, had built with his own 2 hands. He wasn't her blood, but he'd been there for every scraped knee, every late night tear, every dream she dared to chase. But now, all she saw when she looked at him was a reminder of where she came from, the part she wanted to erase. David was black. Marissa was not. And though he had loved her as his own, the world's quiet poison, racism, had found its way into her heart. When she kicked him out, she didn't just close a door. She burned a bridge built on decades of sacrifice. But what Marissa didn't know was that the man she just cast aside had been keeping something hidden. A 5 million secret that would change everything she thought she knew about love, worth, and justice. David grew up in the deep South, where his worth was measured not by his heart, but by the color of his skin. He learned early what it meant to be invisible, the kind of invisibility that isn't magical but crushing. Store clerks followed him down aisles. Teachers overlooked. Jobs turned him away with polite smiles that said, "Not you." But even in that world, David refused to become what the world expected. He worked long hours fixing cars, saving every dollar, dreaming of a life where love could mean more than lineage. When he found baby Marissa in that cold, gray foster home, frail, quiet, abandoned by parents who never came back, he didn't see her color. He saw a child who needed someone. And for him, that was enough. He brought her home in a small blanket, hands trembling with the weight of new fatherhood. The neighbors whispered when they saw him, a black man carrying a white child. Some said it wasn't right. Others said it was strange. But David never flinched. He knew love was louder than their gossip. At night, he'd sit by her crib and hum songs his mother used to sing, soft melodies that filled their tiny apartment with warmth. Every milestone felt like a victory. Her first laugh, her first steps, the first time she called him Daddy. He worked 2 jobs to make sure she had everything she needed. Mornings at the garage, nights as a janitor. He'd come home smelling of oil and bleach, but his eyes lit up when she ran into his arms. He'd say, "You're my little miracle," and she'd giggle, tugging on his uniform. They didn't have much, but they had each other, and for years that was more than enough. But as Marissa grew older, the world started to speak to her differently. In school, children asked questions she didn't know how to answer. Why is your dad black? Are you adopted? The questions turned into stares, the stares into laughter, and soon, shame crept into the spaces where love once lived freely. David noticed it slowly. The way she'd hesitate to hold his hand in public, how she'd ask him to drop her off a block away from school. He told himself it was just a phase, that every child goes through moments of embarrassment with their parents. But deep down, something inside him began to ache. He tried to fight it by loving her harder, showing up to every recital, every parent-teacher meeting, even when people whispered or stared. He was proud of her, proud of the young woman she was becoming. He believed that love could outlast prejudice. Yet with each passing year, the distance grew. She stopped inviting him to events. She stopped talking about her friends. And when she looked at him, it wasn't admiration anymore. It was confusion, maybe even discomfort. Still, David held on, because love doesn't let go easily, even when it starts to hurt. He told himself she'd find her way back, that the world's cruel voices couldn't drown out a father's love forever. But he was wrong. The world had already started to win. By her late 20s, Marissa had carefully built a life that looked perfect from the outside. Her world gleamed. Sleek office buildings, champagne parties, elegant clothes that whispered wealth. She had crafted an image polished enough to make people forget where she came from. But every reflection, every passing glance, carried a ghost, the shadow of the man who raised her. David still called, his number lighting up her phone like an old song she didn't want to hear anymore. Sometimes she answered, offering small talk filled with polite distance. Other times she let it ring, convincing herself she was too busy. The truth was, she didn't know how to fit him into this new life she had built, one that demanded she erase the parts that didn't match the picture. Her coworkers didn't know about David. They assumed her parents were professionals, people of status, and she never corrected them. It wasn't that she was ashamed of him, or at least that's what she told herself. She just didn't want to explain. She didn't want to see their polite smiles fade when they realized her father was a black mechanic from the wrong side of town. The few times she did mention him, She called him old friend of the family, a phrase that cut David's name out of her story like a wound that never fully healed. He noticed the distance. Every word between them felt thinner, emptier, stretched too far to hold meaning. But he didn't confront her. He simply listened, asked about her day, told her he was proud of her. And though she always replied with thanks, she never said she loved him back anymore. The silence between those two words became a canyon. When David came to visit her one afternoon, it was meant to be a surprise. He had dressed in his best shirt, clean pressed, though faded from years of wear. He carried a small bouquet of her favorite flowers, sunflowers, and stood in the lobby of her glass office building, smiling like a man proud of what his little girl had become. But when she saw him, her smile froze. Her coworkers glanced over, curious. Someone whispered. Her face flushed. And for a moment, David saw something in her eyes that felt like rejection dressed as politeness. She stepped forward, her voice low. "Dad, you shouldn't have come here," she said, almost whispering. "It's just not the right place." He looked at her, confused but calm, and nodded. "I just wanted to see you," he said softly. "That's all?" That night, David sat alone at his kitchen table, the flowers still clutched in his hands. He thought about how the world had told him love could conquer anything, but it hadn't prepared him for this. The racism he faced from strangers never hurt as much as the quiet shame from his own daughter. Yet he still found reasons to forgive her, convincing himself that maybe she just needed time to remember who he really was beneath the color of his skin. It was a rainy Thursday when David's world finally began to crumble. The mechanic shop that had been his second home for 2 decades shut down without warning. The owner handed him a small envelope with his final paycheck and a muttered apology. 20 years of loyalty reduced to a few words and a handshake that didn't mean much. David gathered his tools, his framed photo of Marissa, and a coffee mug that read Fate One Dad, a Father's Day gift she'd given him when she was 10. He packed everything into a worn cardboard box, trying to hold on to dignity even as the walls of his life felt like they were closing in. The rain came down in steady sheets as he walked to the bus stop. Each drop stung against his face, cold and merciless, like the world was reminding him how small he'd become. When he got home, the silence in his tiny apartment felt too loud. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the peeling paint, and thought of Marissa. He hadn't seen her in months. Maybe, he thought, it was time. Maybe this was his moment to ask for help, not money, not pity, just a place to rest, a reminder that he still had family. When he showed up at her apartment building, the concierge looked him up and down, uncertain whether to let him in. David stood there, drenched and tired, explaining that he was her father. The man hesitated until Marissa appeared in the doorway, her hair perfect, her dress pressed, her eyes wide with shock. She hadn't expected to see him like this, worn, weathered, a living reminder of a past she'd buried under luxury. She glanced behind her, checking if anyone saw. "Dad, what are you doing here?" she whispered, her voice carrying more irritation than concern. He smiled gently, holding up the box. "I lost my job, sweetheart. Just need a place for a few days. Until I figure things out." The air between them was heavy, filled with everything they weren't saying. She hesitated, her hand gripping the doorframe. "You can't stay here." "David," she said. It was the first time she'd ever said his name like that. "Not Dad, not Father, just David." It landed harder than any insult could have. He blinked as if trying to process the sound. "I understand," he said quietly, even though he didn't. He turned, walking back toward the rain, his shoes splashing through puddles that mirrored the neon glow of the city. Marissa closed the door slowly, leaning against it as her chest tightened, but pride kept her from running after him. She poured herself a glass of wine, sat on her couch, and told herself she'd done the right thing. Later that night, she scrolled through her phone and posted a photo with her friends, all smiles, all laughter. The world none the wiser that she just sent the only person who ever truly loved her back into the storm. The phone rang early one morning, slicing through the quiet hum of Marissa's apartment. She was getting ready for work, brushing on mascara, her reflection crisp and flawless in the mirror. When she answered, her tone was brisk, distracted. "Hello." A man's voice on the other end spoke her name softly, introducing himself as an attorney. His words were careful, deliberate, as if each one carried weight. "Miss Green, I'm calling on behalf of David Mitchell. I'm sorry to inform you that he passed away last night." Her hand froze midair. The mascara brush slipped, leaving a streak across her cheek. For a few seconds, she couldn't form a sound. The room suddenly felt smaller, heavier. The man continued speaking, but his words blurred into a low hum. All she could hear was the echo of that last night she saw him. The rain, the way he stood there silent and drenched. Guilt crawled up her throat like smoke. She wanted to ask how, where, when, but the words stayed trapped behind the wall of pride she had built around herself. When the lawyer mentioned a will, her confusion deepened. A will, she repeated, her voice cracking. He explained that David had named her the sole beneficiary and that he had requested she come to his office to receive something personally written for her. The rest of the day felt like a blur. She went through motions, the drive, the elevator ride, the polite nods of strangers, all while her mind replayed memories she'd spent years trying to forget. The lawyer's office smelled of leather and paper. On the desk sat a thick envelope sealed with her name written in familiar handwriting. Her chest tightened as she took it. The lawyer said nothing, only gave her a solemn nod before excusing himself. Alone in the room, Marissa hesitated. The paper felt warm in her hands like it carried his heartbeat. She broke the seal carefully and unfolded the letter inside. "Marissa," it began. "I don't know if you'll ever understand why I loved you the way I did. Maybe one day you will. I knew there might come a time when the world would make you forget where love came from. But I never wanted you to forget who you are." She stopped reading as her vision blurred. Her fingers trembled. She wiped her tears and forced herself to continue. "Everything I worked for, everything I earned, I left for you, not for wealth, but for freedom. The kind I never had. There's a trust in your name, $5 million. I built it quietly, piece by piece, because I wanted you to know that even when the world gave me nothing, I still wanted to give you everything." The letter ended with a single line that broke her completely. "I forgive you, Marissa. Always." She pressed the paper to her chest and wept until her body shook. All the things she had been running from, his love, his color, his goodness, came crashing down around her in silence. Marissa drove to the small house on the edge of town, the one she hadn't visited in years. The streets looked smaller now, quieter, as if time itself had shrunk them. When she stepped out of the car, the air was thick with the smell of wet earth and motor oil. The wooden porch creaked beneath her heels, and the door, unlocked, gave way with a slow sigh. The house was still, like it had been waiting for her. Dust floated in the sunlight pouring through half-drawn curtains, illuminating the ghosts of memories she'd left behind. Every corner whispered pieces of the man she once called Dad. The same clock ticked softly on the wall, though it had stopped long ago. The couch, worn and sagging, still had a faded blanket folded neatly on the armrest. On the coffee table sat a mug half filled with cold coffee, as if he'd only stepped out for a moment. Her eyes drifted to the photographs lining the mantel, her childhood frozen in frames, her 5th birthday, her graduation, her wedding day. In every photo, David stood slightly to the side, smiling, proud but humble, as if he never wanted to take up too much space in the picture. She ran her fingers along the frames, dust collecting on her fingertips. Then she noticed the letters stacked neatly on the kitchen table, dozens of them, maybe more, each one addressed to her in the same careful handwriting. None had been mailed. She sank into the chair and opened the first one. "Hey, Pumpkin," it began. "I know you've been busy, but I just wanted you to know I'm proud of you. I saw your interview on TV last week. You look beautiful. I hope you're eating well." She reached for another. "Don't worry about calling back, sweetheart. I know you've got a lot going on. Just wanted to tell you that I love you." Each letter was softer than the last, his voice so vivid on the page that it felt like he was still there, sitting across from her, speaking with that gentle patience that had once made her feel safe. By the 10th letter, her tears had smudged the ink. The walls around her seemed to close in with every word she read, every memory that returned. She could hear him humming somewhere in the back of her mind. That old song he used to sing when she was small. Her gaze fell on a small wooden box on the counter. Inside were keepsakes she hadn't seen since childhood. A crayon drawing of her holding his hand, a ticket from her first school play, the hospital wristband from the day he brought her home. Each item carried a piece of him she had thrown away long before he was gone. She held them close, her sobs quiet and broken. The money, the success, the life she had built, none of it could fill the space he had left behind. Racism doesn't always wear a hood or speak in slurs. Sometimes it whispers through generations, hiding in shame and denial in the silent spaces between Dad and David. Marissa spent years trying to escape the part of her story written in his skin, the same skin that had protected her from the cold, the same hands that built her future. She thought love had color. She thought success would wash away her past. But when she opened that letter, she learned what the world never taught her, that love, when true, forgives even what it shouldn't have to. Now, every year on his birthday, she visits his grave. No cameras, no followers, just a daughter whispering apologies into the wind. Because sometimes the richest inheritance isn't the money left behind. It's the love we were too blind to see when it was still standing in front of us.